What's going on, people, and welcome back to the channel. So I'm going to do a quick match reaction to the game that finished earlier on. Celtic, Kairat Almaty 0, Celtic 0 in the Champions League playoff. Kairat Almaty winning 3-2 on penalties in Kazakhstan. Celtic once again failing in the Champions League qualifier to get into Europe's elite competition, and in the process they will be in the Europa League this season. This is really hard for me to react because I have to be honest, I'm not surprised. I had a bad feeling after last week's game. I just didn't see us winning tonight. I really didn't. First off, fair play to Kairat Almaty. I thought they were the better team over both games. They showed more to heart, more desire, more passion. They wanted it more than us. And I wish them luck for the Champions League and how they will get on. It's a tough place to go there, but, that's no excuse. Celtic, the travel and everything, the time zone and everything. Kairat Almaty had to travel to Bratislava and play Slovan, and they beat them. They had to come to Glasgow last week and they got a draw. They've come through 3 qualifying rounds with a lot of travelling. That's no excuse. The heat's no excuse. And, yeah, Celtic, again, Celtic is, and this performance, it was dreadful. It's a dreadful performance, We know certain players were just anonymous. McGregor was horrific tonight. I think we need a question about McGregor, to be honest. He's not good at the European level. I think he slows the game down. He's just not forward thinking. He was extremely poor tonight. I think, we need to get somebody else in, to take the barrel load off McGregor, because he's just not at the standard for European football. Even domestically in the Old Firm games, I think he's losing his touch, to be honest. I thought Nygren was extremely poor. I like Benjamin Nygren, but he had another poor game tonight. Really was bad. He was better when he moved out to the right-hand side. Why we started Forrest and put him there. And Brendan did that. I have no idea, to be honest. Engels should have started. Maida had 2 chances over both games in this playoff where he should have scored, but he didn't. I don't think Maida wants to be here. I think he wants to go to the Premier League. I don't want him to go. I don't hold guys in Maida responsible for this defeat, really. Obviously the players and the manager will take responsibility for the performances. It wasn't good enough over the course of 2 games. Brendan should have started different players, but it's very hard for Brendan because he didn't have the quality that he needed because of the people at the football club who are really to blame. Those people, the boards, they should be resigning tonight. That's just not acceptable. I'm sorry, but they've been doing this for so many years. As I've said so many times, how many times is it going to take for them to let the Celtic fans down when it comes to European qualifiers? They never, ever, ever show ambition. Doesn't matter who the manager is. They never listen to the fans. They never listen to the manager, and then it comes back to bite them on the backside. It's just outrageous that these people think that this is okay. They just want to settle for domestic football. They're not interested in anything else. I don't want that for this football club. Nobody does, really. If you had any common sense, you would actually realise and be ambitious that dominating Scotland is not what we should just be doing. In terms of the game, Celtic, in terms of chances, we didn't create much. Very poor. No creativity whatsoever. Very, very poor. Yang is just... That was horrific from Yang. Yang is nowhere near the standard to be a Celtic player. He's not even good enough for the SPL. He's awful. Absolutely awful. Forrest hasn't got it anymore. He was dreadful as well. Ralston gives 100%, but he's just simply not good enough. Ralston got injured as well, and Kobe Donovan had to come on. I thought Donovan did all right when he came on, to be honest. But, that's where we are. We've got to rely on Kobe Donovan, a youngster, 18, because Anthony Ralston got injured, and because Alistair Johnson's injured. It's just horrendous. Recruiting again from Celtic, absolutely terrible. Liam Scales done okay at centre back, but left back, oh man, left back Scales was awful when he went there. I was not impressed with him at all. He looked so nervous. Tierney, I don't think Tierney was good tonight at all. I thought he committed a lot of stupid fouls, to be honest. I wasn't impressed with him at all. Tierney, Tierney's been good since he's come back, but in these 2 games he's been nowhere near the standard. He hasn't been the worst player. He has tried in these 2 games, but I just don't think it's a Kieran Tierney we've seen in other games. It went to penalties. And we missed ours. Adam Eder missed his Dyson missed his, and I think it was Callum missed his. No, it wasn't Callum. Who was it? It was McCowan who missed his. You know, it was extremely disappointing. I knew it was going to penalties. We weren't going to win. I knew we weren't going to win when the ball was even kicked, to be honest. I gave up last week. That sounds really terrible. You know, you should never give up on your team. But I had no faith we were going to win this tie at all, you know. People are saying we should have beat them anyway. You know, they're not a good side. Yeah, they may not be a good side, but what they did do was show team spirit and everything like that. You know, we didn't have that in any of the games, to be honest. We didn't have the quality. We didn't have the fight. We didn't have the passion. And yeah, we sleepwalked into this. We haven't been good for a while. You know, that defeat to Aberdeen in the Scottish Cup final was just horrific. You know, this was even worse. You know, this team, you know, is the lowest ranked team we've ever faced, and we've been beaten by them. It's just despicable. It really is. You know, the people at the top of the club need to leave tonight. You know, Desmond, Nicholson, Lorwell, Brown, Mackay, Lorwell, everybody needs to go. You know, it's shocking, their attitude towards us. It really is ridiculous. You know, they think that this is acceptable. They'll charge people even more now for the Europa League. They'll say, oh, it's disappointing. You know, the players should have done more. It was the manager's fault. You know, it's not, you know, that is true to a certain point. You know, they're the real reason we didn't get through. You know, they're the ones who didn't take this seriously. You can argue Brendan didn't take it seriously, you know, didn't take that manager seriously and that team seriously. That's a good point, but at the same time, Brendan has to turn to his bench. And who's he got on the bench? You know, Kobe Donovan is 18 years old. It's not fair to rely on Kobe Donovan to come on to replace Ralston. You know, he has to rely on Ralston to start. You know, nowhere near good enough for Celtic. Liam Scales, not good enough. Adam Eder came on, did bugger all. Adam Eder's nowhere near the standard for Celtic. You know, Dyson doesn't want to be here. You know, you've got Callum McGregor in the middle of the pitch. You know, he looks slower than a cart horse, you know. Hatate was horrendous. You know, we've got so many, you know, Negron. It was so poor. It really was. Like I said, Kairat with a better side over the two games. Good luck to them in the Champions League. I'm extremely disappointed and annoyed and angry. You know, I just want the board gone. I really do. You know, these people are just fucking despicable to me. You know, they're an absolute fucking laughing stock to us. You know, their ambition, they haven't got any. You know, their ambition is to take money out of the fans and not invest it properly or not invest it at all. It's outrageous. And yeah, Celtic are out the Champions League. Once again, you know, this has happened so many times over the years in these qualifiers. You know, this has got to be our worst defeat ever, to be honest. This is even worse than losing to Shakhtar Karagandhi. You know, and the defeat to Astana. You know, at least we got through those ties. You know, this one we didn't even have it looked like winning any of the games because we had no quality. And yeah, you know, if Brendan resigned tonight, you know, I wouldn't blame him. If Nottingham Forest is looking for a new manager. Apparently they're going to sack Nuno Santos. Apparently they're looking at Ange Postecoglou and Brendan Rodgers as possible replacements. If Brendan comes out after tonight's game and says, look, I'm really sorry, but I have to resign, I wouldn't blame him. I wouldn't be annoyed at him this time. I really wouldn't, because, you know, the board haven't backed him. You know, I mean, you could argue, people will argue saying, well, Brendan hasn't signed a new contract. Well, Brendan probably said to the board, you know, I need investment to repeat what happened last season. You know, last season is a prime example of what happens when you actually invest in the team. You know, people are criticising Arnie Engels and Adam Eder and Austin Trusty. But, you know, in Europe, they actually, all three of them actually did okay. You know, they actually helped us. You know, I thought Arnie Engels was absolutely fantastic against Bayern Munich last year in that away game, for example. And yeah, I just got no other words to describe how bad that was. I feel so sorry for those Celtic fans who travelled all the way out there, you know, to Almaty, you know, in that boiling heat, you know, sweating for like 120 minutes. It's just not on, you know, it's really not fair for the fans. It really isn't, you know, the way they're treated by everybody at the football club. You know, the way that they treat the supporters is just despicable. You know, there should be fans outside that ground tonight, you know, protesting, saying, Lorwell, get out of the football club. Desmond, please sell your shares. You know, they all need to give up their shares and go, because they're just despicable to me. You know, it's going to be hard. You know, they'll now go to that game on Sunday and say, okay, well, if we beat Rangers, everything will be forgotten about. It's not the case, you know. I think we need to react now. I think we need to, you know, boycott. We need to not go to games. We need to not buy merchandise, not buy any of these Europa League packages. Fuck the Europa League, to be honest. I'd rather we weren't in Europe at all. If the board are never going to be ambitious and get us through these qualifiers to the Champions League, what's the fucking point? You know, I'd rather not be in Europe at all. Then, you can sort of understand the board then to a certain point. But, you know, I'll never listen to this board. You know, I want them out. You know, they're fucking disgraceful to me. I hold them at the highest percentage in terms of who's responsible for this. I think it's their fault predominantly. And yeah, Rangers on Sunday. We got to hope the Rangers don't beat Club Brugge tomorrow night. You know, at least Rangers have got a goal in their tie. You know, we've scored none, you know, in our tie and gone out. It's ridiculous. You know, I think Club Brugge should beat Rangers. I think it's too far for Rangers to go over there and get a result against Club Brugge. We're lucky we didn't play Club Brugge tonight. Club Brugge would have absolutely hammered us, to be honest. They hammered Rangers last week. But I do think Club Brugge will beat Rangers tomorrow night. I'll be surprised if they don't and Rangers miraculously come back and win that game. But, yes, it's off to Ibrox on Sunday. Be interesting to see what the reaction is. I honestly think that the fans are going to go off their nuts at the boards. I think, like I said, I think the fans should be outside the ground right now, protesting all night until the board actually resign. But that's not going to happen, unfortunately, is what I want it to. But yeah, thanks for watching this video. Take care. I'll do a reaction to the game against Rangers on Sunday. Peace.